Hello, welcome to Web of Stories. My name is Melinda and I am so excited to be here with this video today. As I have talked about ad nauseum since, before we even got into 2025, I am hosting a reading event in March called March on the Moors, where we do deep dives into the Brontes. And I will link the announcement video that I posted in January down below, as well as the Discord that I have set up for this group. But I did want to revisit this a bit with some suggestions. There are 4 prompts for this event. And the first one, and it's the only thing you have to do to be a participant in March on the Moors, is to read a Bronte novel. And I wanted to, for those of you who've never read a Bronte novel, I wanted to kind of go through where I think a newbie should start. And there's a couple of on-ramps, and I'm going to go by each sister. I'm going to start with Emily Bronte because Emily Bronte only wrote one book, which is Wuthering Heights. My advice for starting, if you choose Emily Bronte, is to not. Don't get me wrong. I love Wuthering Heights. Wuthering Heights was actually the first Bronte book I read. I hated it the first time I read it, though. It took a second reading for me to really enjoy it. This is definitely a Marmite book. People have very strong feelings either way about this book, and that's great. That's understandable. It is not a typical book. If you look at all 7 Bronte novels as sort of a grouping, this is not a typical book. If you've never read a Bronte and you're just open to starting somewhere, I would say try to get another Bronte novel under your belt before you read Wuthering Heights. If you do choose to read Wuthering Heights, either as your first book or not, or if you've already read a Bronte novel and you're interested in doing an audio version of it, there is an audio recording. I do think it might be an Audible exclusive. I'm not sure about that. That is narrated by Joanne Froggatt. She was Anna in Downton Abbey. I listened to that recently. It is the best audiobook I've ever heard. It's amazing. That is the way to go. But yes, again, Wuthering Heights, if you've never read the Brontes and you're open to starting at different books, this is not where I would recommend starting. Get something else under your belt first. So now let's move on to Charlotte Bronte. So Charlotte Bronte wrote 4 novels. Her first novel, which was The Professor, the first novel she wrote was The Professor, but it was the last novel published. It was published posthumously and it was edited by her husband, Arthur Bell Nichols. I have said this before because I have recently reread that book. If you really want to be a Bronte completist, or you really want to kind of look psychologically how Charlotte Bronte, what made her tick, then I would recommend The Professor, but otherwise I don't recommend The Professor. It's just not a very good book. There's a reason why it wasn't published in her lifetime. Also, it was mined. Some of the things in that book were mined for other books, so it's a little repetitive if you read her other books. So that's just my feeling on The Professor. Now, most people, when they start with the Brontes anyway, they start with one of 2 books. They start with Wuthering Heights, which I've already said, don't start with Wuthering Heights, or they start with Jane Eyre. And I'm also going to say don't start with Jane Eyre. Not because Jane Eyre is bad, but because it's good. So, another author I read a lot is Agatha Christie, and I have been asked many times, where should I start with Agatha Christie? And I have given different answers depending on the person, what's going on and what they want. But I have always said, don't start with And Then There Are None, because And Then There Are None is the best and it's only downhill from there. That's kind of the issue with Charlotte Bronte's books, okay? So, where I would recommend starting with Charlotte Bronte is Shirley. This book, was, I believe, the last one she wrote. I think this was the last one she wrote. Nope, this is the second book she wrote, or the third book she wrote. Well, that's the last one she wrote. This is not, it's not a gothic romance that you kind of expect when you hear the term Bronte. In fact, I actually just started doing audio reread of it last night as bedtime stories. And this is the first sentence of the second paragraph of this book. If you think from this prelude that anything like a romance is preparing for you, reader, you never were more mistaken. This is not a point of being a romance. There's a little bit because that's what's expected of books in the time, but really this is a story of female friendship between 2 women, Caroline and Shirley. Heads up, you have to go a long time before Shirley even shows up in this book. That's a thing. If you look at it like that, and especially if you go into this without the expectation of something like Jane Eyre, you're going to have better luck. One thing that I think is important to keep in mind about this book, and I think it brings a lot more to the book in this case, is it's when she was writing when Charlotte Bronte was in the process of writing this book, both her sisters, Emily and Anne, died. And it is believed that Caroline is Anne and Shirley is Emily. And I think when you have that in mind, this makes it a much more poignant book. As for feel, when I first read this book back when I was in college, to me, it felt like a Jane Austen book. I had been taking a couple classes, and Jane Austen was also one of the classes. So I was reading a lot of Jane Austen along with the Brontes, and we all know about my feelings with Jane Austen, trying to repair that relationship. But upon rereading this, I realized it felt a lot more like Elizabeth Gaskell. So I would actually recommend starting with that. So the next book, if you want to read all of her books, would be Vilette. If you want to skip Vilette, perfectly fine. Perfectly fine. Vilette is the last book she wrote, and it is strange. It is a very strange book. I am going to be doing an audio reread of this. I'm not sure if I will get to it during March on the Moors, only because Shirley's like 25 hours long, and I listen to like half an hour a night, so that's 50 nights. I might not get to it. But this is the story of an English woman who goes to the continent to become a teacher in a girls' school. And there's some sort of typical Charlotte Bronte things like trouble with the headmistress. That's a whole biographical thing with Charlotte Bronte. And there's also just some weird stuff. It is just kind of a weird book. When I reread it last December, I really had some negative feelings about this book. However, since reading The Professor, and this is the book that probably got the most from The Professor, after rereading The Professor, I do want to go back and give this one another shot, which I will be doing on audio at some point. But I would say do this, if you want to read all three, do this after Shirley, but before Jane Eyre. Then go for Jane Eyre. Jane Eyre is a fantastic book. I have nothing bad to say about Jane Eyre. Don't consider it a romance because, yeah. I will say romance is a very problematic term with the Brontes, just in general. Everyone says this is such a great love story. This is not a love story. Not a love story. There is a romantic element in this, of course. I don't think that's the point of this book. I think the point of this book is a coming of age novel of a young woman and independence and those sorts of things. But I love this book. I do not accept criticism of this book, except if you want to like bag on Edward Rochester. You do that all you want. I don't care. But because I do too. But I love this book. I just think if you want to read more than one book by Charlotte Bronte, you need to not start with this one. Okay. And that brings us to Anne. And as I have said in my announcement video, Anne Bronte is the greatest Bronte, and I will die on that hill. Now, Anne Bronte wrote 2 books. The Tenant of Wildfell, this is her second book, The Tenant of Wildfell Hall, which is my favorite Bronte novel. So fantastic. And then her first book, which is Agnes Grey. Now, the prompt is to read a Bronte novel, and I'm going to put a little plug in for Agnes Grey because this is our group read if you would like to join us. If so, please let me know. It's going to be on Voxer. I have a schedule that I'm going to put up right here. This is also on the Discord for the channel. And also, I should say on the Discord, there's threads to discuss all of these books, and they are spoiler threads, which means you don't have to worry about spoiler tags. You go into them, with the exception of Agnes Grey, go into them expecting everyone had already read them. Agnes Grey, I do put a note on it to look at the schedule, and as long as we're past where, if we haven't gotten to where we are in the schedule, you need to use spoiler tags, but other than that, you don't. But yes, so this is our group read. Now, I have been in the process of rereading at least once, rereading all the Bronte novels. And this is the one that I have not gotten to purposely because I was saving it for this event. I have not read it since college. I do remember liking it. I don't remember the details, but I do remember liking it. This little novel gets overshadowed by Jane Eyre quite a bit because they're both about governesses. This is not like Jane Eyre, though. I am going to read the back of this. There's only one paragraph. I'm only going to read that much. Drawing on her own experiences, Anne Bronte wrote her first novel out of an urgent need to inform her contemporaries about the desperate position of unmarried, educated women driven to take up the only respectable career open to them, that of a governess. Struggling with the monstrous Bloomfield children and then disdained in the superior Murray household, Agnes tells a story that is at once a compelling inside view of Victorian chauvinism and ruthless materialism and, according to George Moore, the most perfect prose narrative in English literature. So that is Agnes Grey. I'm very excited to revisit this with you guys. So please let me know if you'd like to join into that Boxer group. We will be discussing this. Her second book, which I will always recommend, Tenant of Wildfell Hall. This book was a scandal when it came out. Charlotte Bronte herself said it should never have been published. It is about a woman who leaves an abusive marriage, which was not a thing that was done. There is a heads up about this, and this is not something I was aware of until I was listening to the Book Cougars podcast, and Chris Wallach was doing a read of this book. There's two versions of this book. You want to make sure, and one of them is edited because, when I say edited, it was edited back in the 19th century to make it not so scandalous. You want to make sure you have the complete one. This one is that. I've never read the edited one. I think I've only ever had this book. So I've only ever read the complete version, but you do want to make sure you have the complete version of this book. But I would totally recommend this book. You can start either place with Anne because Anne is awesome. Anne is the most progressive, forward thinking of the sisters. I mean, Emily was weird. Charlotte had a lot of hang-ups, and Agnes is out there being a feminist. So there you go. The second prompt is to read a biography of a Bronte sibling or of the Bronte family. I'm not going to go into recommendations of this. You can find those easily. What I am hoping to read, as in I've ordered it and it's back ordered and it hasn't come yet, is a biography of Anne Bronte. So I am crossing my fingers that comes in time. If not, I will find another biography to read. There's a lot, including The Life of Charlotte Bronte by Elizabeth Gaskell, if you want to go into that one. That is a little, I don't want to say fangirly, but it is definitely a glowy version because they were good friends. So now I'm going to get into a lot more of recommendations because the next one is a retelling of a Bronte novel. And you could also do a book that involves the Brontes as characters. And I do have recommendations for those. As for retellings of Bronte novels, I wasn't able to find any retellings of books other than Wuthering Heights or Jane Eyre. But I do have recommendations for both of those. So I'm going to start with Jane Eyre, and I have three and a half, shall we say, recommendations for that. The first one I have read, and this is Ray Jane, R-E Jane by Patricia Park. This is modern day retelling. Jane is half Korean, half American, Korean American. I'm going to read a little bit of this. For Jane Ray, I don't know, half Korean, half American orphan, Flushing, Queens is a place she's been trying to escape from her whole life. Sardonic yet vulnerable, Jane toils unappreciated in her strict uncle's grocery store and politely observes the traditional principle of nunchi, a combination of good manners, hierarchy, and obligation. Desperate for a new life, she's thrilled to become the au pair to the Mazer Farleys, two Brooklyn English professors and their adopted Chinese daughter. Inducted into the world of organic food co-ops and 19th century novels, Jane is the recipient of Beth Mazer's feminist lectures and Ed Farley's very male attention. But when a family death interrupts Jane and Ed's blossoming affair, she flies off to Seoul, leaving New York far behind. This was a 5-star book for me, although I will say there was a point in this book about 3/4 of the way through where I said this is going to be 1 star or 5 stars. There's nothing in between. Ended up being a 5-star book. I really enjoyed it. I read it. Let me see if I can tell you when I read it here. I have Goodreads up here, which had, I read it in 2017. So it has been a while, but I do remember really enjoying it. So the next one I have not read, but I may read during March on the Moors if I have time. And this is Wild, Beautiful, and Free by Sophfronia Scott. I do own this book, so hopefully I will get to it, but I'm making no promises on this one. And let me read the synopsis of this one. Born the daughter of an enslaved woman and a Louisiana plantation owner, Jeanette Bebin is raised alongside her white half-sister until her father suddenly dies. His vindictive wife refuses 12-year-old Jeanette her inheritance and sells her into slavery. Now on her own, Jeanette must fight the injustices she faces of her mixed race. She escapes enslavement and travels from Mississippi to Philadelphia to New York to Ohio, all while searching for purpose, love, and her place in a country torn asunder by the burgeoning Civil War. Everything seems to fall into place when she meets Christian Robichaud Colchester, the white proprietor of Fortitude Mansion, a safe haven for escaped slaves where Jeanette teaches. But despite their instant connection, Jeanette isn't convinced she belongs in his circle, in a world that tells her she doesn't fit anywhere. Jeanette must decide what's more important, bending to the expectations of others or embracing her true self. So that is Wild, Beautiful, and Free by Sophfronia Scott. And then this next one, I don't know if I'm going to get to. I kind of do want to read it, although I will get to the sort of asterisks about that in a second. Probably won't be during March on the Moors, but it's there. It's been in the back of my mind. And this is The Wife Upstairs by Rachel Hawkins. So this is Rachel Hawkins is a pretty well-known author. I will read some of the synopsis here. Meet Jane, newly arrived to Birmingham, Alabama. Jane is a broke dog walker in Thornfield Estates, a gated community full of McMansions, shiny SUVs, and bored housewives. The kind of place where no one will notice if Jane lifts the discarded tchotchkes and jewelry off the side tables of her well-heeled clients, where no one will think to ask if Jane is her real name. But her luck changes when she meets Eddie Rochester. Recently widowed, Eddie is Thornfield Estate's most mysterious resident. His wife, Bee, drowned in a boating accident with her best friend, their bodies lost to the deep. Jane can't help but see an opportunity in Eddie. Not only is he rich, brooding, and handsome, he could also offer her the kind of protection she's always yearned for. So my asterisk about this is I have a thing with domestic thrillers, and this sounds like a domestic thriller. If you want to know about it, see this coming week's, because I have a lot to say about a different book, this coming week's weekly wrap-up. But this is a maybe for me. Now let's move on to Wuthering Heights retellings. And this one I am definitely reading. I have already scheduled a buddy read for it. I have been saving it for March of the Moors. And this is Alice Hoffman's Here on Earth. This was it wasn't the first, but it was one of the first Oprah Book Club books. Let's see there. So let me read the back of this. Okay. After 19 years in California, March Murray returns to the small Massachusetts town where she grew up. For all this time, March has been avoiding her own troubled history. But when she encounters Hollis, the boy she loved so desperately, the man who has never forgotten her, the past collides with the present as their reckless love is reignited. This dark romantic tale asks whether it is possible to survive a love that consumes you. The answers that March Murray discovers are both heartbreaking and wise, as complex as they are devastating. For in heaven and in our dreams, love is simple and glorious, but it is something altogether different here on earth. So this is a Wuthering Heights retelling. I am definitely reading it. So the next one I have, this is a YA historical fiction. It's called Stonefield. I've not read this. It just is one that looked promising when I was looking for these. In a small town on the brink of the Civil War, Katrina finds a man making strange patterns in her family's sorghum crop. He's mad with fever, naked, and strikingly beautiful. He has no memory of who he is or what he's done before Katrina found him in Stonefield. But that doesn't bother Katrina because she doesn't like thinking about the things she's done before either. Katrina and Stonefield fall passionately, dangerously in love. All they want is to live with each other in harmony, with the land and away from Kat's protective brother, the new fanatical preacher, and the neighbors who are scandalized by their relationship. But Stonefield can't escape the truth about who he is, and the conflict tearing apart the country demands that everyone take a side before the bloodbath reaches their doorstep. So there's another option. Let me go back for a second. I forgot something. Jane Eyre. One, it's not really retelling, but it's from Jane Eyre that I would recommend and I have read is Wide Sargasso Sea by Jean Rhys. It's a classic. I don't go into this because it is slightly spoilery for Jane Eyre if I talk about this book, but it's very good. I might say if you want to read this, read Jane Eyre first, but it might not make sense, but there you go. Back to Wuthering Heights retellings. So that was Stonefield. And then the third one, which I also have not read, but looks kind of interesting. This is a closer, this isn't so much a retelling. I guess it is a retelling. Nope, it is a retelling, but it's closer to the book because it takes a character and it does things from their point of view. And this is called Nelly Dean, Return to Wuthering Heights by Alison Case. It says, young Nelly Dean has been Hindley's closest companion for as long as she can remember, living freely at that great house, Wuthering Heights. But when the benevolence of the master brings a wild child into the house, Nelly learns she must follow in her mother's footsteps, be called servant, and give herself over completely to the demands of the Earnshaw family. So it's kind of retelling. That's an interesting one to me because it's a retelling of the story from Nelly Dean's point of view. But if you've read Wuthering Heights is from Nelly Dean's point of view. I don't know. So those are some options for Wuthering Heights. Now, the other option I mentioned would be to read a book where the Brontes are characters. And I will show you what I will be reading because I own it. Half-Life of a Stolen Sister by Rachel Cantor. This is a fictional novelization of their lives. I don't need to go into a thing of it, but I have it. It's on my shelf. What a great time to read it. But I have other options for you. Let's see. This one is called The Secret Diaries of Charlotte Bronte by Syrie James. Charlotte Bronte's diaries. Pretty clear. I don't think that it's more of a novelization of her life. So that's more straight down the middle of the lane again. And then we're going to have a little bit more off to the side. I've not read either of these, but one of them I am so going to read. Let me tell you. It's not this one though. The Vanished Bride by Bella Ellis. And this is the beginning of a series where the Bronte sisters solve mysteries. I'm not even going to read more of this. They're mystery solvers. So if you like your cozy mysteries with a literary bent, this is called the Bronte Sisters Mysteries. And the first one is The Vanished Bride. And let me tell you about this other one I just found. And I am reading this book. I'm going to finish this video up and see where I can find it because it sounds awesome. It's called Anne Bronte, Nightwalker. And I'm only going to read the first line because that's all I read before I decided I was going to read this. In 1849, Anne Bronte died a devout and innocent virgin. 3 days later, she rose from the dead. I'm reading this book. I don't know where it is. I don't know where I can get it, but I'm going to find it and I'm going to read it. And it's set in North Carolina. That's interesting. Anyway, there's that. So those are some suggestions for March on the Moors. You know, I am super excited about this event. Reach out if you have any questions. The Discord and the announcement video are linked below, and let me know if you would like to join in the Voxer group for the group read of Agnes Grey. And yes, I will have my Bronte shirts on during March so you can see them because I have a bunch of them. Thank you very much. Thank you for putting up for my excitement. Like, subscribe. Let me know if you want to join in Agnes Grey. I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.